IELTS Writing Task 1 Academic. Today we're going to be looking at process diagrams and how you can respond to these kinds of tasks. I'm Mike Whitey, ex-IELTS examiner. I've graded thousands of different writing tasks for the official test, and also I've been correcting my students' writing for about 15 years. I've also written an ebook on IELTS writing, and on my website IELTSanswers.com I've got a plethora of model answers for Task 1 Academic as well as Task 1 General and essays. In today's video I'm covering how to write process diagrams. I'm releasing separate videos for other types of Task 1 Academic. Make sure you subscribe so you get the notifications. In today's lesson, I'm going to teach you how you can identify a process task, how to plan it, how to structure it. I'm going to give you a sample answer, and then I'm going to finish with a homework task for those really keen students who want to have a go and see if they can write this kind of task. Our sample task today is on how plastic bottles are recycled. When you look at your task, you should be making a plan. You need to think about three things. First of all, an overall summary of what the process diagram is about. Then you need to think about how you can separate the data. Are you just going to have one paragraph, or are you going to divide it into different paragraphs? And then you need to think about your data coverage. With process diagrams, you have to mention all the steps. You can't leave out any steps because otherwise the process wouldn't work, would it? So we're always covering all the data with a process diagram. We can't leave anything out. Whereas something like a line graph with lots and lots of data, sometimes we can leave out some of the data. When it comes to separating the data for a process diagram, you've got two options. One is to find some sort of logical place to split it and divide the data into paragraphs according to that. Imagine you were making a cake. There could be the kind of preparation stages for making the cake and then the baking stages. So that could be one option. The other option is just count up how many steps, split it in half. Let's have a look at both ways we could do that with the current task. One way could be just divide it into half and cover the first 5 steps in one paragraph and the last 4 in another paragraph. However, there's a better way, and if you can see this better way, it'll result in a much better response to the instructions. It will be more like a band 8, 9 sort of response. Let's have a look at what that is. So the better way, if you can do it, is to find some sort of logical way to group different steps together. So for the current task, I've got the first 3 steps together, and the first 3 steps involve collecting and sorting plastic. Right? You can see that in those 3 steps. The garbage gets thrown out, it gets picked up by a truck, and then it gets sorted. So it's the gathering and sorting of plastic. Then the next 3 steps involve preparing the plastic. So I've got those 3 together, and then I put the remaining 3 steps into their own body paragraph. So for this task, my report's going to have 4 paragraphs. I'm going to have an introduction, I'm going to have steps 1 to 3 in a paragraph, steps 4 to 6 in another paragraph, and then steps 7 to 9 in the last paragraph. Let's have a look at how we're going to write our introduction. And when it comes to the introduction, we need to do 2 things. We need to first of all paraphrase the title, the sentence that we're given in the task instructions. Then we need to write an overall summary. Now, I put my overall summary in the introduction. That's because it's the most important sentence of the report. I don't want to run out of time and not have written that sentence, because that will limit my task achievement to 5. I also don't want to leave it to the end and forget to write it. So I think the best place is to put it in the first paragraph and form one solid paragraph rather than two quite small ones. When it comes to paraphrasing our task instructions, there's three things we can do. We can try to rephrase words, we can try to change the form of words, maybe from noun to verb or verb to noun, and we can try and move words around in the sentence. So my paraphrase is, the process diagram illustrates how plastic bottles are recycled. So my diagram becomes process diagram. I'm adding something in, I'm being more specific. This is good. Shows becomes illustrates. And then I change the word recycling to recycled and move the words plastic bottles earlier in the sentence. This is quite an effective paraphrase. The overall summary should give the reader some sort of overall idea of what the whole process diagram is about. There are a number of options. The most common way to do this is to tell the reader how many steps are involved and then what the first step is and what the last step is. This is the normal way you're going to be doing this. By the way, don't just write there are many steps. Be specific. Tell the reader how many steps. With some other tasks, there's other options with what you might say in the overall summary. If you go back to my cake example, you might tell the reader how many ingredients are involved, or certain processes you might want to tell the reader how many pieces of equipment are involved. And you could even do one or two of these together, right? You could say how many steps and how many pieces of equipment are involved. So my overall summary is, overall there are 9 steps, starting with bottles being thrown in the trash and ending with products being made from the recycled plastic, whereupon the process restarts. Now that last part's quite important. That's referring to the arrow that we can see above step 9 pointing back to step 1. That means this is a kind of cyclical process, right? Then we start our body paragraphs. We want to start body paragraphs with a phrase that tells the reader what the paragraph is about, what to expect in the paragraph. Then we're going to mention the data. It's always going to be from first to last in a process diagram. I've written the first 3 steps involve collecting and sorting plastic. So the reader knows that there's going to be 3 steps in this paragraph, and they know the logic of why these 3 are together. It's because they all involve collecting and sorting plastic. Then I go on to give the first 3 steps. This begins with plastic bottles being thrown into garbage bins. Next, garbage trucks collect these bins. Subsequently, the plastic bottles end up in a recycling centre where they are sorted by hand into bottles that can be recycled and bottles that cannot. Note too the sequencing words like next and subsequently. These guide the reader through the report. They're incredibly important, especially for your score for cohesion and coherence. These are linking words that guide the reader, and possibly also your score for lexical resource, especially making sure that you're not getting into a like first, second, third, fourth repetitive structure. The next paragraph. The next 3 stages focus on preparing the recyclable plastic. So again, the reader knows there's 3 stages and it's about preparing the recyclable plastic. This begins with compressing the recyclable plastic bottles together. These compressed blocks are then fed into a grinder that crushes them and transfers them into a tank where they are washed. Subsequently, plastic is put into a machine that transforms them into pellets. Looking at the remaining stages, the plastic pellets are heated and turned into raw material suitable for making plastic products. After this, finished products are created from the raw material. Some finished goods may end up being thrown out into trash cans and subsequently re-entering the recycling process. That last part is telling the reader that some of the plastic goes back in. It's a cyclical process, right? You're going to need to build up some vocabulary to do with paraphrasing. Diagram can be process diagram, shows, illustrates, process, method, recycling, salvaging. You need some words for sequencing events, first, subsequently, after that, finally. You need some verbs of process to describe what's going on. We need ways of talking about putting things in, such as inserted, added, or taking things out, extracted, removed, or changing things, transformed, altered, or throwing away things, discarded. You're going to want some prepositions for locations so that you can explain where things are happening. This is important for process diagrams and maps. When it comes to grammar, it's really important that you can use the passive voice. You're going to need this for process diagrams and maps. You're going to need to know how to use the present and past passive. Essentially what the passive does is it turns a sentence the other way around from the active. The active is the subject followed by the verb, and the passive reverses that and puts the object first and then the subject, or sometimes just leaves out the subject. So for instance, present passive, a book is written by Mike, could just be a book is written. So sometimes we're using the passive because maybe the subject's unknown. We know a book is written, but we don't know by who, so we can't put the person's name in. Or we want to put emphasis on the object and not the subject. So a book is written is the key part, and the by Mike is not as important. Another thing that's really important for these process diagrams is articles. Every time you mention a new noun, you're going to use a, and then when you refer back to it, you can then use the. The best way to explain this is if we want to use the, there has to be something specific that is known to the reader. And if it's not something that's specific and known to the reader, then we use a. So, for instance, I would say, I need a pen. I need a pen. And then once the viewer or the reader can see this pen or they know about this pen, I can now call it the pen. The pen is in my hand. So, I need a pen, any pen. It's not a specific pen. Here is the pen. Now it's a specific pen because you can see it, right? So it's going to be the same in your process diagrams. It's going to be a pen, and then da-ding, it appears. Now it is the pen. So make sure you learn your articles. You're going to need them for process diagrams and maps. The odd error is not a big deal. If you make a couple of mistakes, it's not so serious. But if you have no control over your articles at all, then that's going to send your grammar score tumbling down. Now, I highly recommend that you try and do the homework task. By doing the homework task, that will check your understanding of what you've learned from this video. I have a correction service. The details for that are below in the description of the video. You don't have to use it, but if you did, what you would do is write this task, send it to me by email. I will check it. I'll give you feedback on the errors. I'll give you a band score for each of the 4 criteria, and I'll give you some ideas, tips to increase your score, to get a higher score, to make sure you can get the score that you need in the test, maybe even a bit higher. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if you only needed 7 and you got 8? Wouldn't that be excellent? But I mean, the key thing is make sure you can get the score you need because it's expensive. It's frustrating to not pass tests. A lot of the mistakes students are making are easily preventable, and oftentimes when I see a student's writing, I can give them valuable feedback that can increase their score by maybe half a band, sometimes even a whole band score. I'll also put a link in the description to my ebook in case you're interested in that, and also I have a free PDF for you with a model answer for this task and other kinds of task ones. So make sure at the very least you download that document and have a jolly good read. One of the best ways you can increase your score is by reading lots of high quality model answers. This can help you to appreciate how to structure your report and also give you a lot of ideas, a lot of input on vocabulary and grammar, right? One of the best ways to learn vocabulary and grammar is in context, right? So you're not just learning a list of words that's so boring and hard to remember. When you're reading model answers, you are magically acquiring vocabulary and grammar from this. You'll read words that you can then use in your reports to paraphrase or to add precision or to describe something in an ideal way. Make sure you subscribe to me. That way you're going to get updates when I release my new videos. Best of luck with your preparation.